Now let us come directly to the questions that were asked this year. So the first question of our concern is the question that was related to Africa. The question is, if the last decades were of Asia's growth story, the next few are expected to be of Africa's. In the light of this statement, examine India's influence in Africa in the recent years. This question was for 10 marks, 150 words. So which part of the syllabus will this fall in? It will fall in bilateral relations, right? Because there is no such thing as it is a part of or India's relations with any continent. Because in Africa, what happens is we focus on Africa as a whole, right? That is what is the focus of the world as well. If you look at US is a different country. If you look at Russia, China, there we deal with them bilaterally. Even though in Africa also we have bilateral relations with different countries, right? But the focus is majorly on Africa as a whole. That is why this will form a part of the bilateral relations of India. Fine. Next part is, if you look at the previous year question papers, a similar question was asked in the mains examination of 2015. But back then in 2015, we did not have this bifurcation of 10 marker questions and 15 marker questions. All the questions were for 12.5 marks, right? So that was how the questions were asked previously. Now what happened is, in the last year, there were visits from India's high-ranking officials in Africa. That is why this question was asked this year. If you remember, in 2018, Indian Prime Minister went to Africa in Uganda and he addressed the Parliament of Uganda. And that was a reference to Chinese debt trap diplomacy. And there he had outlined 10 principles of India's relations with Africa. So that is why it was continuously in news, right? We have been focusing on that. Plus, we already had this benchmark of, or we already had this thing of previous year question that has been asked related to Africa. Fine. That is why this needed to be prepared well. So in the revision classes, what happened is we focused mainly on the, the important events that were happening. But we included a write-up on the India-Africa relations in the mains Compass magazine, so that you can pick up your points, understand the issue at hand, and then you can write an answer if it is asked from this particular thing. Fine. So that is why this question was asked this year, because there were many visits from India's high-ranking officials. The India's External Affairs Minister co-chaired the meeting of India-Kenya Joint Commission, plus India provided COVID vaccine support to the African continent properly. That is why Africa was part of the vaccine Matri program of India. India provided millions of vaccines to the African continent. That is why it was asked. So if you look at the 10 guiding principles that were provided by the Indian Prime Minister in the Parliament of Uganda, the Prime Minister talked about Africa will be one of the top priorities of India. Clearly shows the priority that Indian foreign policy has, right? Because Africa is the region which is witnessing interference, which is witnessing influence of China these days, because China has economic might, it is investing heavily. Fine. So that is why, as an indirect reference to Chinese economic policies in Africa, Indian Prime Minister focused on these 10 important points. In this, he highlighted that India will continue to intensify and deepen its engagement with Africa. Plus, India has already shown its sustained and regular engagement with the Africa. Second focus of Prime Minister in this speech was on developmental partnership, which is guided by the priorities of Africa, not by priorities of India, right? That is how we have been differentiating ourselves from the investments that are being done by China, which are accused of debt trap diplomacy. So what the Prime Minister said? Prime Minister said the focus of India's developmental projects will be on local capacity building and creating much local opportunities as possible, and the kind of development that we will undertake in Africa will be on terms that will be comfortable to the African nations, right? If you remember, just 2 years after this, even when the Indian Prime Minister visited Uganda, Uganda was already having a lot of investments from China. And in 2021, we have seen a news related to China taking over the airport of Uganda, right? Because of the debt that the Uganda is under. Fine. That was one of the finest examples of debt trap diplomacy of China. So that is why this was the theme that was outlined by India. Now, if you look at this particular statement, the development partnership that India will have will be based on the priorities of the countries in which India is investing. It will focus on capacity building. Fine. So this is applicable not just to Africa. This is applicable to wherever India is involved in a developmental partnership. It is true for India's neighborhood relations also. For example, India's relations with Sri Lanka, if you look at that, India has been focusing on developing 60,000 houses for rehabilitation, right? So that also shows that India is providing economic support in the form of priorities that have been set by India's partners, not what India wants to impose there. Okay, that is how we are projecting our model there. We are projecting our developmental partnership model there as compared to the development partnership model that has been projected by the China, isn't it? Yes, now Aadhaar will also be launched in Sri Lanka. Very good example. Yes. So the third point that was highlighted by the Indian Prime Minister was India will keep its markets open and make it easier and more attractive to trade, which is indirect reference to India's economic policy. We are interested in trade with all the continents. Africa being resource rich, having one of the youngest populations in the world. It has a very high growth rate in terms of population. So that is why Africa will be the youngest continent in the next coming decades, right? Plus, India will provide help through the digital revolution that India has. So what you see is Africa has 60% of the world's arable land. That is why India's focus will be also be on providing assistance to Africa in the case of agriculture. Okay, if you look at other things, India and Africa will focus on the challenges that are posed by climate change. Both these nations are agrarian nations. India's majority of the population is involved in agriculture, plus Africa is majorly agrarian, plus it has certain resources in the form of minerals. So that is why climate change will have adverse impact on the Africa's interests. Then we are focusing on different areas like cyberspace, the terrorism issue, the UN Convention on Terrorism, everything. Plus focus is on open oceans. All these are in line with India's stated foreign policy goals, if you look at them. Fine. Then if you look at this, India has said that as global engagement in Africa increases, we all must work together to ensure that Africa does not once again turn into a theater of rival ambitions, which was an indirect reference to the colonial past of Africa. Plus, India has also suffered from the colonial past. And because of the increasing interest of different countries of the world in Africa, especially China and the other countries, India has clearly highlighted or shown a sympathy or empathy with the African continent that you should not become a part of what happened here back then during the colonialism time, right? So this is the thing. Plus, India highlighted the commonality between the two, where both want to focus on work together in the form to create a just, representative and democratic global order in the form of, what do you say, the reforms of the United Nations, the reforms of the UN Security Councils, all these things. Fine. Okay, so this was just to highlight the importance that India accords to Africa. Now let's come up directly to the question that was asked. If you look at the question, let us look at some of the data then. So this data will come handy for us in the examination if we have prepared it properly. So if you look at the populations of India and Africa combinedly, it stands at about 2.3 billion, which is around 1/3 of the global population, isn't it? Plus, if you look at India's diaspora in Africa, it consists of nearly 3 million people which are working there. So all this data could have been used properly. India has been participating in the UN peacekeeping forces, and around 4,500 soldiers are there. If you look at the bilateral trade, it stands somewhere around $70 billion. We are not taking the case of COVID-19's impact on this trade, right? We'll look at the general trade data that is there. Fine. Plus, if you look at the overall progress in the trade relations or economic relations, it has increased almost 20 times. Okay, so this is one information that you can easily retain for the examination. You need not retain all the things that are written here, but some of the things can come handy for you if you talk about the India-Africa relations and some of the data which could be projected here. Okay. India is currently spending around 7.5 billion on infrastructure projects in over 40 countries of Africa. This could have been one important point that you could have mentioned while writing this answer. So what would be the introduction here? Or what would be the structure of the question of answering this question? First would be, we have to highlight and contrast the growth stories of Asia and Africa, because that is mentioned in your question. Question is mentioned, if the last few decades were of Asia's growth story, the next few are expected to be of Africa's. So we had to contrast the situation first in the introduction part. Otherwise, we would not have given any reference to the Asian growth story here. Okay. Second part would be India-Africa areas of collaboration. So the next part would be issues and the challenges, and finally what India needs to do. So that would be a holistic answer where we address all the parts of the question that were asked in the examination. So we were required to analyze or examine India's influence in Africa in the recent years. What is meant by examine? We'll first highlight what are the relations and then highlight the issues and challenges. Okay, finally what needs to be done. So we will be examining it properly. So how would you highlight and contrast Asia's growth story with the Africa's growth story? We all are aware that last 2-3 decades, the Asian growth story has been amazing, where China has grown very fast, rapidly. India has grown rapidly. Southeast Asian nations, they have grown rapidly. That is why it was said that these were Asian decades. But now we are witnessing stagnation in some of these economies. Okay, some of the economies of Southeast Asia are stagnating. The economy of China is stagnating, is on the verge of stagnation, you can say. Plus, India's economy is also stagnating. That is why when the Asian growth story is stagnating, Africa, of course, has to be one of the potential areas. Plus, the base of Africa, if you look at the growth story of Africa, the base was so low that if any kind of development takes place or any kind of economic growth takes place, it will be huge, right? So that is why when the base is already low, the economic growth was very low in Africa. So when the economic growth will take place, it will of course be higher as compared to the already saturated growth countries. For example, the US economy, it grows by only 1 or 2%. But the growing economies like India and China, they grow by 8%, 10% at a time, right? So that is how you contrast it. So in the introduction part, you could have written, with Asian giants like China, India, and Southeast Asia witnessing a stagnation and projections of increase in the working age population of Africa and well-endowed natural resources, plus increasing investments in the next decades, plus increasing investments by the global players, the next big growth story is expected to be of Africa, right? We have written this introduction in very precise words, in a concise manner for the examination, isn't it? It includes all the aspects. You look at the diversity of things that have been included in this particular thing, right? We have contrasted the thing that was asked in the question. We have talked about the stagnation that is witnessed by China, India, and the Southeast Asian economies. Plus, we have been focusing on the natural resources. Also, what is happening here? Why is Africa focused? Or why are we focusing on African growth story? Because Africa has natural resources. Because Africa's working age population is increasing. It will have huge human resources, right? So these are the things. That is why introduction has to be very impressive to the examiner. So this could have been one good introduction for the answer. I'm not saying this is the only introduction that you can write. Of course, you can create your good ones, but this can be one thing. Now, if anybody would have started with India's External Affairs Minister addressed the India-Kenya Joint Commission, that is why India-Africa relations are important. Now, that's a very generic thing to do. That times people, what students do is, they give direct reference to any event that has happened in the current affairs. But that is not that attractive. Now, this looks like a holistic thing which keeps the examiner interested. What next? What is happening now? So if you talk about India's influence, that is the second part of the question. We talk about India's influence here. If you talk about India's influence, we have to talk about how India has been engaging. And one of the important platforms for India-Africa relations or engagement is the India-Africa Forum Summit. Almost 3 forum summits have taken place. Even in 2019, one virtual summit took place of this India-Africa Forum Summit. Okay, this is yet to happen now because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It did not take place, but it is going to take place. In this line, the focus is on these 5 aspects. First is developmental partnership. Second is investments. These have been taken up from the speech of the Prime Minister of India in the Ugandan Parliament, where he clearly outlined the priorities of India-Africa relations, isn't it? So what you could have written, developmental partnership, investments, because India is one 4th largest investor in Africa. Look at agriculture and climate change. We are interested in peacekeeping, security, open and free oceans. We're interested in cyber security, digital revolution, and both are collaborating on just, representative, and democratic world order, because Africa, despite having 1/3, despite having a very important, having an important share in the global population and share in the resources, does not have much representation in the UN body, right? You look at the UNSC, India does, the African continent does not have any representative there. Fine. Plus, India wants to compete with Chinese influence. So these are the areas of influence or collaboration of India in terms of India's relations with Africa. What would be the next part? We'll focus on issues and the challenges that India faces. So these challenges will be first important project that was started by India, Japan combinedly was the focus of India's project was on Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. Now this initially when it was talked about was seen as a counter to the Belt Road Initiative. However, it is yet to be implemented effectively on the ground. Although it looks like a very lofty project or it looks like a very ambitious project, you can say, but nothing has materialized on the ground, which is true for all the projects of India in India's neighborhood. You look at the INSTC, you look at the Tapi pipeline, all these things, the IMT, India-Myanmar Thailand highway. So these investments of India have always been accused of not being implemented on the ground, although talks are there. For example, India is talking about BBIN right in India's neighborhood, the Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal connectivity project, but that has also not seen the light of the day, isn't it? So this is the thing, that Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, here we have used the example also, the important term here, plus we have talked about the status of this particular growth corridor. Then there is lack of emerging companies for India which are outreaching African markets. Majority of the companies which invested, for example, the telecom sector were initial companies that invested in Africa. But the telecom sector is also witnessing a stagnation now. Fine. Plus new countries, new companies of India are not that interested in African markets. So that is why India will have to create favorable environment for that. Okay. Fine. Then if you look at India's projects, they are mainly standalone projects. For example, one of the project of India would be in agriculture sector. The other would be in some other field. But there is not much integration here. Plus the implementation is also slow. When China invests, it invests heavily. It invests in an integrated manner. Okay, the Chinese companies are brought by the state itself, by China itself. Indian government merely acts as a facilitator here. Okay, so Chinese investments have to be contrasted here with India's investments. So that is why you see India's projects are standalone in nature. Plus there is slow implementation in contrast to the Chinese projects. If you look at the trade relations, although they are on improving trajectory, but it has not picked up if you compare India's trade relations with other neighbors of India or other countries with which India has trade relations. If you look at European Union, if you compare India's European Union trade with the trade with Africa, it is nowhere. That is why the trade relations have not picked up. Of course, it's a very generic statement which could be written. Then the Indian companies fail to compete with the Chinese investments and cheap exports to Africa. The only field where India can compete or India is competing is the information technology services plus the pharmaceutical, which are two benchmark industries of India, which India is competing with. So these are the issues and the challenges, of course. So that is how we are examining. We examine the areas of influence. We examine the challenges. What could be a conclusion? In the conclusion, of course, we'll look at improving some of these or removing some of these challenges that exist here. So to further boost its presence, India should focus on investments in first human capital because Africa has young working age population. Collaboration with NGOs to implement developmental projects because majority of these countries need humanitarian assistance, right? Plus, India needs to support its private sector companies to focus on faster implementation of some of the projects that are ongoing here, right? So this was a holistic answer. You could have approached it on these lines. So although this question looked very easy, but once you start writing it, then you really face the challenge. That is why answer writing is really important, because if you have handled many of such questions beforehand, before the examination, you could easily handle such questions in the examination. And such kind of writing skills will only come with more and more practice. It is not a one-day effort, right? Palash, the slides were not visible. Which one? This one, right? Fine. So these are the two slides. What happened? You dozed off between the discussion? No? Fine. And how was it covered in our resources, or how you could have prepared it? So it was a part of our Mains Compass magazine, where we had an elaborate section, because what I highlighted is, I highlighted that if you are preparing, you need to first prepare write-ups on all the neighboring countries. Second focus has to be on regions of focus for India. Indo-Pacific was a section in this particular Compass magazine. West Asia was a section. Africa was a section. That is why it was there in the Mains Compass magazine. Page number is there on the screen. You can see that.